Started.
I just wanted to quick say I'm sorry I can't put my video on because I'm running around doing a bunch of things while I'm listening in. So unfortunately I can't put my video on this morning, but when it's possible in the future I will.
No worries, Colleen. I'm glad that you were able to join us. Again, my name is Roy Kessel with the Sports Philanthropy Network, and we're happy to have all of you with us today. We have about 20 or so people registered, so I'm sure we'll get some more strolling in as time goes by. But really today what we wanted to focus on is really a conversation on the issues surrounding how to best work on training your board of directors or some of your staff during a time like this that we're going through. I think the challenges that are in front of all of the organizations that we represent is that there's a significant amount of downtime that people aren't used to. I know for many people in many organizations, it's frustrating to try to figure out how do we keep people engaged, and beyond that, how do we do something productive with this time, because we can't necessarily do all of our regular job remotely. I think most people are adapting, and after the first few weeks settling into a comfort zone. But when you look at the projections and the data, it seems like we're still going to be in this for quite a long period of time, and that might go as long as another 2 months. Some projections have it going out even longer in terms of maybe not a full return to activity. We might have some partial returns and things, but I think that there's going to be, in a sense, a new normal of how we need to engage and interact. And what we want to do is discuss how this time can be used productively to train people in your organization, stakeholders. And so in many foundations and nonprofits, it's really a time where you have a chance to focus on your board of directors, which are often very difficult to get together at one place, as well as some of the internal staff in the nature of professional development and leadership training that they may not have time for with all of their other functions. It's always difficult to pull people away. I thought what would be great at the beginning here, just so we have a handle on what kind of organizations people represent, is if we could go around, and I'll ask Kayla to introduce herself first, and Doug, then you'll be on deck, and get a chance to have everybody introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their what their organization is doing. Lisa, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Okay, so Kayla, why don't you start, and then Doug will be on deck.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Kayla Bradham. I'm development for the Sports Philanthropy Network. I also am a high school language arts teacher at a Milwaukee school choice school. So I'm seeing this not only in the sports realm, but also with all of my high school students that I'm virtually teaching right now. So definitely difficult times, especially for our high school students who are used to an active and fit lifestyle. It's interesting watching my kids do Taibo videos from home for gym class. So
Okay.
It's all of you guys.
Well, my name is Doug Garner. I'm the wheelchair basketball coach at University of Texas at Arlington, and I coordinate our adapted sports and recreation on campus.
Okay, Colleen? No, Colleen, are you there? Okay, we'll come back to Colleen. Alicia, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alicia Contreras. I am the Project Play Western New York coordinator. So we are purely funded out of the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, and we fund youth sports organizations, as well as put on many different events through the Western New York 8-county region.
Okay, thank you. How about Kendra?
Hi, I am the executive director of Algonquin Sports for Kids. We're a youth development organization. and we run sports programming in Buffalo, Lackawanna, and Niagara Falls in Western New York.
Okay, terrific. Julian?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julian with Operation Get Active. I work for Chattanooga Football Club Foundation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we run an after-school soccer program. It's a health initiative to get kids physically active.
Okay, great. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Delpinarati. I'm a professor at George Washington University and direct the GW Sport Philanthropy Certificate Program.
So Lisa does a great job with that program and has really built up a terrific following and organization there and put a lot of people into the sports philanthropy space. I think single-handedly is trying to staff half of the sector, right, Lisa?
We're trying, and we're really supporting everybody through this COVID crisis.
Yeah. And I think that's really the challenge, is trying to figure out what do we need for different boards and different organizations. What we've heard from a lot of groups over the course of time is that they really struggle to make time to get their board together for a board retreat or a board training type of program. And typically on most boards of nonprofits, you've got quite a few individuals that are busy because they're usually successful people in your community, and that's why you want them on your board. And so the challenge is always, how do you take those people away from all of their other responsibilities and get them involved in a way that they can participate more, be more proactive on behalf of the organization, and what can we do with this extra time to start training them? I'll let Heidi introduce herself to the group.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late. It's been a Zoomathon already. But I'm Heidi Webb with Green Kite Fundraising. I've known Roy now for a little over a year, right?
Yeah.
And I'll be apparently leading one of these next week. So I'm here to do my homework as well.
So Heidi does a great job on the fundraising side, and she's going to be leading our webinar next Wednesday on fundraising and crisis, and really getting into more specifics on some of the challenges that organizations are facing as we look at the current landscape. I think the first couple weeks, everybody was sort of in shock and really just trying to take a snapshot and see what the landscape looks like. And unfortunately, as we've seen over the last 3 weeks, it changes day by day. And when you think you're getting a handle on what those timeframes are going to be, it changes substantially. We've seen everything from people who are shutting down schools and programs till the beginning of April, and then the middle of April. Now we've got the Olympics canceled in July, other major sporting events canceled in July. And I think the expectation is that we're going to not really have a good sense of what the end point is going to be, I believe, until after the end of April. I think by the end of April, we'll start to get a little bit of a handle on what that curve looks like and how long it's going to be and how long these quarantine type of measures are going to be involved. But what we really don't have a handle on is what it's going to look like after that curve, in terms of how much recurrence there's going to be of the virus and how willing people are going to be to get together in person or to travel. So I know a lot of organizations, as they try and do training for their staff or training for their board of directors, those are typically, in a sense, events, right? You're bringing everybody together. You're putting everybody in, by design, in really close quarters. You're putting them in a conference room and you're locking them in for a retreat, and you're saying, okay, we're here for the morning, the day, the weekend, and you're bringing food in, and literally, other than going out to the bathroom or taking short breaks, the idea is to keep everybody there, keep everybody connected to what's going on. And so now when we look at these things, we've got to figure out how how the process is going to work and what we can do to train them. So I'm interested to hear from different organizations how they approach these things. Andrew, I see just jumped on the call. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
Hi there. Andrew Bondarovich. I'm an attorney in New Jersey, serving New Jersey and New York primarily, but was an NFL contract advisor for about 10 years to represent about 75 players up and down the chain, and have always kind of maintained a specialty in the nonprofit space. So we work with clients at the youth, college, and kind of professional roles as far as nonprofits go as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for jumping in, Andrew. So I'm interested to hear, as people are working on these things, you know, Doug, as you look at your group down there, how is that set up in terms of structuring or training the staff or the people that support your organization? You're still on
You're on
mute.
mute.
There we go.
Thank you. On the university level, we operate under the Division of Student Affairs. So we've been doing a lot of things like this to try to keep up. And one of the biggest things I'm doing right now is trying to keep all my athletes engaged and finishing school this semester and continuing to find ways to train and stay ready for next seasons. You know, it's just finding ways to get them engaged any way we can. That includes the university.
Okay. And then do you get, from an outside perspective, from a training perspective, is that something that falls under your responsibility, or is that something that you're seeing the university handling from their end?
It's mostly coming top down.
Okay. All right. Alicia, as you guys are looking at things from Project Play, are you seeing the organizations that you fund and support in the Buffalo area taking special measures right now to take advantage of this time?
I know a lot of our organizations are kind of just taking it day by day, and with some of our granting that we're doing, those that are helping with Feed More, Meals on Wheels, we're trying to provide opportunities for a lot of our grantees to still be involved in some way, practicing social distancing and all the CDC guidelines. But a couple of our organizations are actually now using this as professional development for their part-time employees, where they are having them week by week basis go through different coaches training and recertifying all of their coaches and still paying them. And then as we start to roll out our coaches training module and look at other things, we're going to use our grantees as the kind of like training and the basic for it, where if they want to be involved, it's another way that we can reallocate our funds that were supposed to be for some of our major events and giving back into those organizations right now. So we're trying not to completely cut funding at all from them and trying to help them stay afloat as much as possible and just trying to create new opportunities for them as of right now. So they're just shifting more into like the web-based aspect of everything.
Yeah, I think, and you guys were scheduled to have obviously a large program last weekend for, I think you said, a few hundred organizations that we were going to be participating with. And I know from when I was out there in November, a lot of those organizations were struggling in a sense to figure out the best way to interact and develop and manage their boards of directors. And one of the constant questions that we got was how they can use the resource of the board of directors to be more effective as an organization. And one of the challenges is the constant tension between people wanting a big board because they want to have a lot of support for their organization. They want to have a lot of names to put on invitations for events and golf outings and dinners. And on the flip side, it's very difficult to manage a large board, and it's very difficult to make sure that those board members are engaged. And so, Heidi, I know you've worked with a lot of different organizations. I'm not sure how involved you get directly with the board development piece of things, but interested to hear what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, so I'm just one of those folks. I posted recently a quote from John F. Kennedy about there's a Chinese brushstroke, and the stroke actually means crisis and opportunity at the same time. And not to sound Pollyanna, but I think there's opportunity within all of this. And so just so you all know, my nonprofit clients range from very large international to teeny tiny national to teeny tiny community, like one county within one state. So I wish I had sort of this template that I could just give them all and say, here's the solution. And though I'm kind of at an advantage because I can see things across a pretty broad base. So to answer your question, I think the opportunity, or to sort of lean towards the opportunities in this is, board members are called to give of their time, their resources, and their connections. That's their job, right? They govern, of course, but those three things are imperative to their participation in your nonprofit. So, I've been telling each nonprofit board is a little different and a little bit the same, but what's the same is every board member makes a financial contribution of sorts to the organization. And I've been saying, call your board members just like you would call, your major donors and your corporate supporters, and first ask them how they're doing, right? If they're holding in okay, if they need anything from you, tell them how you're doing, and then ask them to make their annual contributions early this year. And so my clients have been finding success in doing that. And, these nonprofits range from a $10,000 a year commitment to much, much higher than that. So, what they're saying is we can create payment plans, but we need you now. We've always needed you, and we appreciate your support, but we need you to really step up now. So it's actually an opportunity. Board member, I don't want to keep belaboring this, but board members are achievers, right? If they were to take their Gallup Strengths Finder, they're achievers, and you have to give them something to achieve right now. They want to help you. They want to save you. There's a reason that they're playing with you in the sandbox. So get on the phone and ask them and tell them and share with them and cry with them if you need to.
Yeah, it's the challenging part of this is people often look at their board really as fundraising, but only in a sense of I'm turning to my board to give me money. And I think that that's a mistake. The organizations that do it well understand that just like when you go to a networking event, you're not trying to sell to the people at the networking event. You're trying to educate the people at the networking event about what you do and what type of person you are and what your business is about. And as you do that with board members, as Heidi said, certainly most organizations that we deal with have what's called a give or get type of commitment, where they've got an obligation either to directly make a donation of a certain level or secure sponsorships or gala tables or golf foursomes or whatever in that amount. And when you go to them now, the challenge in asking people for money right now is, in a direct ask, is that you better know what situation they're in, what type of business or profession they're in. Andrew mentioned that he's an attorney. So a lot of my friends that are attorneys are crazy busy now because from an employment side, if you think about the employment attorneys, how many companies are laying people off or restructuring people's contracts or figuring out how to deal with health insurance and furloughs and everything else. So if you know that somebody's in that kind of practice area, it may be okay to ask them for money. If somebody's a business owner or a restaurant owner and their business is shut down for 2 months, it's going to be really challenging to get them to make that commitment. And what we've found is that what's really been productive for a lot of the the boards and the board members is to help educate them on the fundraising process. And I know Heidi will cover more of this next week, but the concept of the board members being fundraisers, there's a lot of elements to the fundraising process, and not all of those elements are a direct ask for dollars. And so
Right.
what we've seen is groups really doing a good job now communicating with their boards and utilizing their board as goodwill ambassadors to pick up the phone. And as you've heard from Heidi, and we've heard from lots of organizations this week, basically pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, Julian, we really appreciate your participation with our organization over the course of time. But right now, I'm just calling to check on you. I'm calling to check on how your family's doing, how you're doing. It's difficult to be locked up. It's difficult to be alone. If you know more about your donor and their living situation, somebody with the family and having their family together, again, that can be a good or bad thing depending on how well they get along with their family members. But if you know they live alone, that's an entirely different type of conversation. And so calling and thanking them for their past support, and then explaining to them, or getting the talking points to your board members to explain to them, what can we do? This is what our organization is doing, right? We're faced with a crisis. We all found out about it essentially March 11th. It hit, boom, really hard over those next 48 hours. And then people were scrambling for a couple of weeks of what are the next steps? Well, if you're a donor, you don't want to just hear that the organization has sort of gone dark and shut down and you have no idea what their response is. Because as an organization, if I call up Colleen, she might not be able to make a gift right now because of the situation. But if she sees the way that we handled this time of crisis, when the world comes back together, hopefully later this year, right, she might be in a position where she appreciates how we handled that. And so educating your stakeholders, really your donors, your board, on how to communicate that message to others is critical. And in today's world with social media, really everybody that's part of your organization is a goodwill ambassador, right? Because if they're out there on social media and not responding to people, if your organization's social media accounts kind of go silent because you don't know what to say, it's better to have some messaging that you can create. And so from a board of directors standpoint, that's an opportunity to bring them together and have this crisis management conversation with the board, number one. But then I think even more proactively, to take the time with your board to help develop them as a board. You can't do the same type of team building activities on Zoom that you probably could on an in-person retreat. But you know what? People have a lot more time. I was on the phone this morning with somebody that commuted an hour and a half each direction every day into DC. Well, that's 3 hours a day that just opened up for his schedule. So finding somebody like that where it might be really challenging in the normal environment, you might be able to carve an hour or two out. My recommendation for the organizations that we've been speaking to is that they should really focus on a 1 or 2 hour block for these types of board retreats or board trainings. I don't think more than 2 hours is a viable number for most people. I'm not even sure 2 hours is, to be honest. I think most of the things I've seen have been around an hour. But if you're actually congregating everybody together, even if you take a break in the middle for 10 or 15 minutes together, I still think that once you get a whole group assembled, it's often really helpful to let them interact and engage. Andrew, I'm interested to hear about some of the groups that you've worked with and what you're seeing in this type of space. Did we lose Andrew?
He's on mute.
Yeah. I thought he would be back. Okay.
Roy, can I add a note to
Of
your
course.
really great words just now? I think more than ever, I've always been a firm believer that you don't want to treat your board as a living, breathing entity of its own. So in other words, what I try to train my clients to do is not to always approach everything with the board, because as we're learning now more than ever, bankers are impacted by this differently than restaurant owners, than differently than youth, the coaches of youth teams, whatever it is. And so I think when you approach your board collectively, it should be about those things, Roy, that you laid out just moments ago. But when you're speaking to them about fundraising, I really strongly suggest those be one-to-one conversations. Again, and repeating what Roy said, so that you can connect with them very personally, but then also find out things like, great idea. Please use that 1.5 hours one way each day to give to our organization. Since you can't give your typical $2,000 gift right now, and we understand that, can you give, an hour a day to this mission and help us with outreach or what have you? So anyway, I don't want to be on that soapbox, but I think that is so important that you not look at your board right now as one life-breathing thing. They're all just a group of people who have at least one thing in common, and that's that they care about your cause.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that it's really important to treat the board as an extension. You can take efforts to strengthen the board together collectively, but as Heidi said, use them as goodwill ambassadors. The hard part in this space is a lot of us like to have these conversations, as Heidi said, one-on-one, face-to-face. In today's crisis, it might be that Zoom is the only way that we can do that face-to-face. But doing it one-on-one gives you a different level of conversation. And it really becomes a conversation about what their interest in the organization is, and training board members to be comfortable having that conversation. What we found over the years is getting them in that ambassador role to open up those conversations actually leads them to be much more effective down the road as fundraisers, and much more comfortable, because they recognize that if I sit down and I'm going to be talking to Doug for an hour about his gift, we're going to talk about the gift for 5 minutes, but we're going to talk about everything else that the organization is doing, everything else that's Doug's passion, everything else that we have in common. And we're going to talk about the gift, and we're going to talk about the needs that the organization has. But I think the challenge for many groups is getting their boards comfortable with that fundraising process, because most of the board types of meetings are focused too frequently on sort of just reporting. In other words, I'm going to take a piece of paper and I'm going to have the report from the budget committee and from the golf committee and from the gala committee and the communications committee and the membership committee. And we're going to go through a lot of metrics and a lot of data, but we're not utilizing the board process effectively, because the most useful way of spending that time when you have board members is not for them to read minutes and for them to read reports. Those can be sent out by email ahead of time, so that those individuals all have a chance to read it, to digest it, and then they can come to the meeting prepared to ask questions or to challenge assumptions or challenge things that are built into that process. And when you go through the board meeting process, that's an important element of keeping that energy for the organization up. And so setting the expectations for board members, very frequently we hear about organizations struggling. And I know, Alicia, when I was out there, that was one of the common comments I heard, was how many organizations had put together their board when they launched their organization, and now they've got 7, 10, 15, whatever number of people, and they've got a fair amount of dead weight. And so they've got to figure out, how do I manage this board? Because, Heidi's terrific and I appreciate what she did, but now she's just too busy for us. She doesn't have time to commit to her functions as a board member. How can I have that conversation nicely with Heidi? How can I make her feel appreciated and cared about as a board member? And at the same time, kind of hold up a list of expectations that we've discussed that she's agreed upon in the past, and feel good that she's in a place where she can step off and she can recognize that she isn't performing even the way she would like to perform, and she's not participating in that same level. And there's definitely samples of things that people are interested in terms of board agreements and conflict waivers and all types of other documentation relating to participating on a board. But one of the critical elements that we talk about from board development is taking the time to have an annual conversation with every single one of your board members in person. And again, we may not be quote unquote in person, but maybe we can be virtually in person right now. And even though I never liked to do that before, I've kind of jumped on the Zoom bandwagon and certain conversations that I would never have done with somebody other than face to face over the last couple of weeks. I've had a number of those, and some of them are hard conversations depending on what you're telling people. But it's important, I think, to be able to look people in the eye and have that conversation. And if you're on Zoom one-on-one, it's not the same as being in person, but I think it's a whole lot better than being on the phone call. You can tell whether somebody's focused. You can tell whether they're distracted and they're looking around at 8 other things on their computer, or whether they have CNN on in the background and they want to just see what the latest ticker count says. It really is a different feeling. So I encourage anybody working with boards or working with organizations that need your help structuring that with boards to do it that way.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yep.
Hi guys, this is Colleen. Sorry, I actually literally had my hands full and couldn't unmute to introduce myself before. I founded a new nonprofit just outside of Chicago about a year ago, and we actually started our after-school programming the week before the shutdown. So happy to have gotten that first week, learned a lot, but I am essentially doing what you're suggesting, Roy, and the rest of the group here, going back and working with my board on, what foundational things do we need to improve. My question on what your, statement was about kind of trimming the fat essentially on the board. I guess I'm wondering if it's possible to have sort of an organizational board that works on the program and the business side of things, and then to have a fundraising board that doesn't have the same responsibilities, so that people can come prepared and bring their talents and their treasures, but maybe have different levels of expectation. Is that something that you guys have seen works well?
Heidi, what have you seen in that area?
That's an interesting. I was about to answer the question until you said works well. So yes, I've seen it. I've seen it quite a bit. Here's the deal. I think I've seen scenarios where you have a board, and it's a strong board, and they govern and they do all the things that right. And then there's a resource and development committee or a fundraising committee or whatever you want to call them, who really are very separate from the board. They're advisors. They're not board members, and they like it that way. So in other words, if I could paint you, Colleen, the perfect picture, I would paint that for you. Because, as you know, there's work coming from your board, but there's also work going out to your board. So the commitment is like a marriage kind of for 3 years or however long your terms are. I've seen resource and development committees work very, very well because their interest is, let's say, in events in particular. So that model that I just explained, where you have a board and then you have a separate set of advisors, and they're not board members, but they have one board member sitting on that committee. That works so well if they're event focused. Where I've seen it fail miserably is when there are either two boards or a board and a committee just like that, and they are the all-encompassing fundraising responsibility. The burnout is so high and animosity builds because the board isn't giving, and this set of other humans is doing all of the heavy lifting. So I know I'm contradicting myself, but I'm just sharing with you what I've seen. If your fundraising is event heavy, I think the first model I mentioned will work very, very well for you. If that's not the case, I would suggest finding fundraising types, and Roy will add, I'm sure, I know you're chomping at the bit to comment too, but if that's not the case, I would stick with the model that everybody's all in, all hands on deck all the time, and there are certain people who chair certain aspects of your fundraising. So for example, if you, studies still show that young people, not myself anymore, but people who are, 30 and under, over 50% of them say, you can approach me online for a donation. 50% of them say, I could have never met you and you asked me for a donation, and if it's a strong enough ask, I'll give. However, everyone over that age category, and certainly well into mine, they need a personal ask to be able to give personally. So you need diversity in age and diversity in all sorts, with whatever you decide to do, whatever sort of makeup you decide. But I just feel like with an organization new and wanting to build like yours, Colleen, I'd go with the all hands on deck first, and then find out who your fundraising champions are on the board, and ask them what they think. Would they like to separate out and have a branch that meets and builds and grows and has its own heartbeat, or do they prefer to work with your existing board?
And I think
Thank you.
Heidi raises some great points. I think, Colleen, as you're building a board, one of the pieces of advice that I give organizations is be careful about who you put on your board at the outset, because it's really hard to get people off of your board. And you're much better off, if you're not sure about somebody, to use them in the role Heidi described as being an advisor or being a supporter of your organization. There's millions of people that support organizations and do a lot of work for them that are not board members of those organizations. And in many cases, some of those people do more work than the average board member. But it at times is challenging, especially at the outset, because we typically say, oh, we're launching a new organization. I want to just gather everybody that's close to me and bring them in and put them on the board. And now I've got 12 people on my board. I'm good to go. And what you're going to find over the course of that first year or two is that some people will perform really well. Some people will be just what you expected, and you'll get disappointments. And moving people off is challenging. And so one of the easy ways to approach that, especially since you're new and you're just starting, is to make sure that you're staggering the board terms and how long people are on. So when you start at the beginning, as Heidi said, often it's used as a 2 or 3 year term. But when you start a new organization, don't give everybody 2-year terms. Make sure that you might start with some people who have a 1-year term, or start some people at a 3-year term, so that you're continually building and rotating your board and the board doesn't get stale. I think that it's really important, as you look at developing your board, to make sure that you get new blood and new ideas coming through. I wouldn't suggest 1-year terms as a typical matter of course, because I think it's hard for people to really get up to speed and get engaged for a long-term view of the organization. But it is important to give you a reason to sit down with somebody and have that conversation where there is a date that they know their term is expiring. Maybe your bylaws allow you to have them renew that term, and you can keep them if they're doing great. But it's an easy way for somebody to opt out if they're not performing, and if you recognize that, they recognize. People are pretty honest with themselves when you sit down and have that conversation. And Lisa, I'd love to have you jump in here. You've been working with all kinds of organizations for a long time, and talk about what you've seen as an effective way to handle some of these board issues.
Yes, so sorry I was cut off, but we just got an announcement, all our county, because it's been overloaded by everybody using Zoom, that it completely crashed. New world here. So I'm back. Have you already talked about making sure that the board has different skill sets?
Not yet. That's a great transition. So I'll turn that over to you.
Right. I mean, it's just so important that, yes, you have, somebody who has a legal background, somebody who has an accounting background, somebody who has ideally marketing, where they can lead the marketing aspects, and event management background where they can lead the events. So we're finding that really somebody with a social media background that can guide the interns, especially for small staff that you rely on interns or other volunteers, as long as you have somebody that can take that role and oversee somebody else doing it that's younger and less experienced. Ideally, you have somebody that works for an advertising agency or a PR agency, because they're very, very helpful. A graphic arts person to develop your collateral. So, I know sometimes we're like, I just need somebody that has passion, and that's important too. But try to really have job descriptions where you fit the right person to that job description. And so every board member knows exactly what they're supposed to be working on and contributing to. Because sometimes you join a board and you're like, well, here I am. And you don't have a real focus of what you're going to contribute to that board.
I think that's a critical point, because I've been on boards at times where you come to the meeting and you feel like your only responsibility is coming to a meeting once a month, and you get handed a printed sheet of minutes from the last meeting, which says very little different than any other month, because the conversations tend to be similar. And when you don't have a role, especially for new board members, it's even more critical. I think as you get more mature board members that have been with the organization for a while, they will settle into a role and they'll find something where they know they can add value. But when I come on as a new board member, obviously I joined the board because I'm interested in doing something. And then if you just let me sit there for a year before you give me any responsibility, I really do not feel that engaged with the organization. And so it's important, as Lisa said, try and find complementary service areas and complementary skill sets, because it's not only the skill set that's important, it's the whole relationship base that those people have. So when Lisa used the example of graphic arts or social media, the people that are in that space might be able to find you interns that can work for your organization. So that person might not have time to manage your social media. Maybe they can help create a plan. They may not have time to do your flyers and invitations and things, but if they're in that area, it's very likely that they know students and young people that are coming up that do have that experience.
And this sounds a little snooty, but as you're evaluating different board members, and again, beggars can't always be choosers, but one thing you can look at is their LinkedIn profile. How many connections do they have? Look at their Twitter. How many connections do they have? I mean, sports teams are actually doing this now. Yes, the number one reason why they're scouting or recruiting a player is because of their talent. but they're also looking at what kind of marketing prowess do they have. So you may want to look at your board members' social media and connections.
You know, the other thing is there are, Lisa, as Lisa said, you need to identify what your needs are above the person and the relationship that you have with them. But there are also, particularly for Colleen, but anyone else who needs this, there are resources out there, organizations that help recruit board members for volunteer service. Taproot Foundation is one. If you're in the DC area, Compass is a great one. They find phenomenal board members, but almost every community has a community foundation that has links to corporate folks who want to volunteer in a board member capacity. And you know, I would look into those. I would dive into those, because these are the people that they're finding and recruiting, everyone from leadership programs like Leadership Greater Washington, Leadership whatever, fill in the blank. They have people who are somewhat trained in leadership and are ready and willing and want someone to ask them to step onto the board.
Those are all really, really great suggestions. I took lots of notes. Thanks, you guys.
And I think LinkedIn, doing LinkedIn searches. So if you put in, I don't know, even public relations and nonprofit, or like, what's your cause? Or you put in a skill set and cause, but you also want to put in there either volunteer, just because those three things may pull up a set of people who volunteer, have an interest in your cause, and have that skill set.
Yeah, I think that balance, it really becomes an art as you start looking through that. And one of the best ways to find new board members is from your existing board members, because they have an interest and a passion for your organization. They want to see your organization succeed. And I encourage you to start early as you're building that board with a process that requires a nominating process to go through so people can submit that. I think one of the worst things that I see organizations do is kind of just carte blanche. You know, if Roy's going to walk around and I'm starting a new board, and it's like, okay, Heidi, you're on the board, Lisa, Doug, Alicia, Andrew, Julian, Colleen. Okay, I've got my board. All right, and now you don't even know necessarily which of these people know each other, which of these people have interacted. You want to make sure that people are comfortable with each other. You don't want one board member to have a veto power over everybody else, but it is important to consider the continuity of the board and the relationships that the board members have with each other, because especially as we discussed in smaller organizations, those board members are going to interact quite a bit. If you're talking about more of an advisory board role where there's 30 or 40 people, maybe it's less important. But when you've got, Lisa, what are you seeing that organizations are comfortable with from a size perspective these days?
From a size
of a board?
I think 10, well, really 8 to 12 for your executive board. And then you usually have other like advisory boards, or committees.
Right.
You bring on other people to serve in those different functions. So you have an executive board. You may have an advisory board, which is more senior people that may not have the time to be on an executive board, but they can advise. And then you have these like working specialty, either you call them committees or advisory committees.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have those committee structures and make sure that the committee is understanding what obligations are out there, what the organization needs to do. Tamara, welcome. I'm glad you're with us. But the committee structure that Lisa's talking about is really important, because that goes back to Heidi's comment earlier of how you can get people involved in the organization and doing things that are advisors and supporters of what you're doing. That's a great role for them, is have them on a committee, have them participating, and that becomes a feeder system for your board, because now you can, you know, Colleen, as you're establishing this, right, if you have 3, 5 committees, and we could talk more about what types of committees you would want for your organization, you might be able to fill those in and add 5 to 7 people on each committee, that each committee is chaired by a board member. And as time goes by, over the course of a year or 2 years, you're going to really see which of those committee members are making an effort, which of those committee members are really working. You're going to develop a relationship with those committee members, and I think it makes it fairly easy at that point to identify what you think are a good pool of prospects to join your board. I know we're coming up on the end here, and I want to make sure that we have time for more questions. If anybody has specific questions, that you can either type in the chat or you can jump online and ask there. No? Nothing direct? Go ahead, Doug.
Kind of for everybody, as part of a much bigger bureaucracy of the university, what's the best way that our program, as kind of a non-traditional program, can position ourselves in the scramble for resources and everything on campus, with the campus board and the people who make the decisions on our campus?
So before we get to answer that, I know Tamara just jumped on here, so I want to let her introduce herself quickly, and then we'll come back to that question. Go ahead, Tamara.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Tamara, but my mom calls me Tamara at home and then Tamara in public, so some days I get confused. So Tamara is welcome. But I'm a graduate student at the Clinton School of Public Service here in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Bill Clinton founded this program back in 2007 to prepare students and everyday people to go into a life of public service. And so for me, I'm a former basketball player. I play sports at Philanthropy College as well as Ridgeway High School in Memphis. And sports is a great tool that helped me maneuver through life. And so I've been trying to get into the space of sports philanthropy as well to help the athletes, the high school students here, prepare them not only for college, but life outside of high school if they want to pursue sports, but just trying to figure out how they can navigate that and what works best for them. Because as I always mention to them, everyone's not going to go to the NBA, everyone's not going to go to the NFL, or every student, you got to find something that works for you and continue to work towards it. So that's one of the a passion of mine.
Great.
And are you familiar with there's an event that starts now at noon that goes to 4 that Tackle What's Next is offering? I'll put that in the chat session, and you can use that link if you want to join that.
Yes, ma'am.
I think
those are great events. Lisa, we'll put that up there with the link to the Tackle What's Next webinar, or it was supposed to be Final Four weekend, so they were going to do a live series of events. Doug, I want to get back to your question. I think the bureaucracy at educational institutions is very different than in many other environments. I know Lisa has a lot of experience there, so she can probably jump in with some of her thoughts on how things work at GW.
Yeah, I wrote a couple things. Schools right now are just desperate to keep or attract more students because they're all scared that they're going to go elsewhere or online. And then, money that you can bring in from external is always important. Or there's media, but the other two are more important. So I was just curious what your program, does it just serve existing students, or what role does it really play at your university?
So our mission is to help people with disabilities get a college degree, be competitive in the job market. So when I came in 2007, we had 7 athletes, and now we have about 35 athletes, and we recruit from around the world. We have students working on masters and PhDs, and in the world of disability, that's really huge in helping them move on and become independent.
So, and you're unique. I don't think there's that many, but I mean, do they pay to come to your school, or are those like?
Some of our athletes pay. Some of them get like voc rehab assistance, or in Texas Workforce Committee. We recruit veterans. I travel around and do veterans clinics, so we recruit a lot of veterans, and they have VA support. So they go from full scholarship athletes to athletes who put together their own financial aid however they can.
I mean, I think you would just illustrate what your program brings to the university by the number of students it attracts that would not have come to your school without you. And then, the PR value, what publicity have you received about your program? And then try to make some financial, hey, this program has brought XYZ dollars to the university, and it's important that we continue. I would say that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our time is up. I appreciate everybody being with us. As Lisa said, she put the Zoom link in there for the Tackle What's Next webinar. It's also linked from our page. We've got a resource page, a COVID-19 resource page of organizations and activities and things that are coming and available to use during this time. And we're continuing to add to that. If you're aware of other resources and other programs, please let us know, and we can put those up there and make those available and get them out on our social media accounts. I hope you'll check out the other webinars we have coming up over the next few weeks and really the next 2 months. And please let us know if there's topics that are of interest to you. I know Doug and I have already spoken about holding a town hall type of meeting on adaptive sports, but really including the issue of how other organizations can incorporate adaptive sports programs into what they're doing. It shouldn't be something where the adaptive sports are completely isolated or outside of the scope of other sports organizations. So thank you to everybody for coming and participating today.
I wanted to add one promotion for this.
Sure.
It's a virtual 5K for any of you working with youth. They can just sign up, go out and run 3.2 miles, run, walk, roll, meaning bicycle. I put the link there. It's Positive Tracks. They will give $10 for everybody who registers. And
fantastic.
So
when is that happening?
April 10th.
Okay.
So it's something that all kids can sign up and feel like they are contributing to this virus, to the crisis relief. Because I think a lot of kids feel helpless. We don't want our kids on the front line. We're sequestering them, but this way they can do something, be outside, as well as feeling good about what they're doing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'll definitely put that up and utilize that. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you participate in more of our events over the coming weeks.
Great.
Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye.
Okay.